Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the most immersive and slightly questionable experiences in ancient Rome. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through Rome, and at first it feels like the city is trying to overwhelm you on purpose. Carts rattle over uneven stone streets like they personally hate your ankles. Vendors shout over each other with the confidence of people who believe volume is a valid business strategy. And everyone around you moves like they've lived here their entire lives, which, inconveniently, they have. You, on the other hand, are doing your best not to look lost, which is not working. And then, before you even see it, you smell it. Wine, smoke, cooked food, and something else, something older, something that has clearly been part of this establishment since before your arrival and will remain long after you leave. You slow down, because now you know. You've found it. You turn slightly, and there it is. The tavern. No sign, no door, no attempt at making a good first impression. Just an open front facing the street, a stone counter, and large clay jars built into it like the building itself decided to become a bar. People are already gathered around, packed together. Very packed. Elbows touching, shoulders colliding. Someone leaning into the counter like they've been there long enough to qualify as furniture. You pause. This is your moment. You could walk away. You could choose dignity. You could continue down the street and pretend you never saw this. But instead, you step forward, which is your first mistake. Immediately the noise hits you, not gently, not gradually, all at once. Conversations overlapping, laughter cutting through everything, someone arguing with the kind of confidence that only comes from being completely wrong. And then you realize something even more important. There is no space. None. You are now part of the crowd. You didn't enter. You were absorbed. Someone brushes past you like you're an obstacle. Another person shifts slightly, and suddenly you're standing closer to strangers than you are to most people in your actual life. You adjust your stance, carefully, defensively, like this is a social situation, but also possibly a contact sport. And yet, something about it works. It's chaotic, unpredictable, slightly concerning, but alive, very alive. This place does not care if you are comfortable. It does not care if you are ready. It existed before you arrived, and it will continue functioning whether you understand it or not. And as you stand there, trying to process everything at once, one thought becomes very clear. You are not visiting a tavern. You are being introduced to Rome, in its most honest form. And Rome is not interested in easing you into the experience. You're already too close to leave without making it obvious. So you commit. You step in. Or at least you try to. Because stepping in suggests a smooth, controlled movement. This is not that. This is more like being gently, but firmly, absorbed into a human wall. Someone shifts, you shift, and suddenly you're inside. Congratulations. You no longer control your own position. The first thing you notice is that personal space does not exist here. It's not reduced. It's not limited. It's gone. Completely. You are now standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers who are fully comfortable with this arrangement. You are not. Someone's arm brushes yours. Someone else leans across you to reach the counter. At one point, you are fairly certain a person behind you exhales directly into your ear. You consider leaving, briefly, but it's too late, because now you're part of the system. The noise surrounds you instantly, not background noise, not ambient sound, active, aggressive noise, voices overlapping, laughter cutting through everything. Someone arguing about something extremely important that you will never understand. You try to focus on one conversation, You accidentally hear 5. None of them connect, none of them finish, and all of them are delivered with complete confidence. You nod slightly at something. You don't know why. You don't know who you're agreeing with, but it feels appropriate. The counter is just in front of you now. You didn't move toward it. You were moved. And this is where it becomes clear. There is no structure here, no lines, no waiting system, no, "Excuse me, I was here first." There is only presence. If you're close enough, you get served. If you hesitate, you don't. You watch someone confidently push forward, place an order, and receive a drink within seconds. You admire the technique. You are not ready to attempt it, yet. And somewhere in the middle of all this, something shifts in your mind. At first this felt chaotic, uncomfortable, overwhelming. Now, it feels normal, not good, not ideal, but normal. Because this place doesn't adapt to you, you adapt to it. And as you stand there, slightly more relaxed, slightly less aware of how close everyone is, you realize something important. You're not just inside the tavern, you've been accepted by it, which, in this environment, feels like progress. At some point, you realize you need to do something. Standing here silently while being gently compressed by strangers is not a long-term strategy, so you decide to order wine. Because that feels safe, familiar, a decision you won't regret, which is optimistic. You lean forward slightly, or rather, you are pushed forward slightly by the natural movement of the crowd, and catch the attention of the person behind the counter. No greeting, no menu, no explanation. You say, "Wine." They nod. That's the entire transaction. Seconds later, a cup appears in your hand. No ceremony, no presentation, just wine. You look at it. It looks like wine. That's a good start. You take a sip, and immediately realize something important. This is not your wine. Not in the modern sense. Not in the comforting, predictable, this pairs well with dinner kind of way. This is Roman wine, which means it has been diluted with water, possibly mixed with herbs, and almost certainly stored in a way that has given it character. A lot of character. It might be warm. It might be slightly sour. It might taste like someone had an idea and decided to follow through without asking for feedback. You pause, just for a moment, re-evaluating. Then you take another sip, because you're here now. And leaving after one sip would feel like a personal failure. And something interesting happens. It doesn't necessarily taste better, but it starts to make more sense. The sharpness becomes expected. The warmth becomes normal. Your standards begin to adjust at an impressive speed, and around you, nobody seems concerned. People are drinking confidently, quickly, like this is exactly what they wanted, which suggests one of two things. Either this is genuinely enjoyable, or everyone has collectively agreed not to question it. You take another sip, longer this time, and now you understand. The wine is not the point. It was never the point. The wine is just part of the experience, a tool, a way to participate. Because in a place like this, holding a cup means you belong, even if you're still not entirely sure what you've signed up for. And as you stand there, adjusting to the taste, the noise, and the fact that you are now fully committed to this situation, you realize something. You didn't order a drink. You accepted the environment, which in Rome are basically the same thing. At some point, the wine has done its job, not in the sense that it improved your decision-making, quite the opposite. It has made you confident. Confident enough to look at the food, which is your second mistake. You glance down at the counter. Large clay jars are set into it, dolia, each holding something that was, at some point, prepared for human consumption. Stews, lentils, vegetables, meat, probably. You lean slightly closer, trying to identify what exactly you're about to commit to. This does not help, because everything looks like it has been cooking for a while. A long while. A respectable amount of time, possibly longer than necessary. You consider not ordering. You really do. But then you notice something important. Everyone else is eating, without hesitation, without concern, which creates a strange kind of social pressure. If they're doing it, how bad can it be? This is how mistakes are made. You gesture toward one of the jars, confidently, like someone who understands the situation. You do not. A portion is served into a small bowl and handed to you. Again, no ceremony, no explanation, just food. You look at it. It looks acceptable. You take a bite and pause. Not dramatically, just enough to process. It's not bad. That's the first thought. It's not amazing either. That's the second thought. It exists somewhere in the middle. Warm. Filling. Slightly inconsistent in texture. Possibly overcooked. Possibly exactly as intended. You take another bite. Because now you're invested. And slowly, the logic reveals itself. This food is not designed to impress you. It's designed to feed you. Quickly. Efficiently. Without unnecessary complexity. And in a city like Rome, crowded, fast-moving, unpredictable, that's exactly what people need. You eat a little more. And now you understand something. The standards here are different. Lower? Maybe. More realistic? Definitely. Because this isn't a place for refinement. It's a place for function. You eat, you drink, you talk, you move on. And as you finish your portion, or at least reach a point where continuing feels optional, you realize something important. You didn't just try the food, you accepted it, which, in this environment, feels like progress, and possibly a small victory. At some point, between the wine and the food, both of which you have now accepted as part of your reality, your attention shifts. Away from the counter, away from your cup, toward the people. Because this is not just a place to eat and drink, it's a place to observe. And unfortunately, to be observed. You start looking around, carefully at first, then more openly. And what you realize almost immediately is that this is not a single type of crowd. This is everyone. To your left, a group of labourers, still dusty from work, speaking loudly, laughing even louder, completely comfortable in this environment. To your right, a soldier, relaxed but alert, drinking steadily while keeping an eye on everything around him like this is both leisure and light surveillance. Behind you, someone who looks like they have absolutely no reason to be here, and yet here they are, fully committed to the experience. And then there's you, trying to blend in, which is not working as well as you'd hoped, because even though nobody is staring directly, people notice. Quick glances, small pauses in conversation, subtle awareness that you are not entirely part of the usual rhythm, not in a hostile way, just observational, like you're new to a system that everyone else already understands. You adjust your posture slightly, more relaxed, more confident. You hold your cup like you belong here, which helps, a little. And then something interesting happens. You start recognizing patterns. Who talks the most? Who listens? Who interrupts? Who wins arguments? There's a rhythm to it. Unwritten rules. Unspoken hierarchies. The loudest person isn't always the most respected. The quietest person isn't always uninvolved. And slowly you begin to understand how this place functions. Not through structure, but through behavior, through presence, through confidence. And as you stand there, watching, listening, adapting, you realize something important. This isn't just a tavern full of strangers. It's a temporary community, formed for a few hours, held together by noise, wine, and shared understanding. And for the first time since you stepped in, you don't feel completely out of place, just slightly out of sync, which in Rome is probably the best you can hope for. At some point, you decide to do something ambitious. You try to follow a conversation, not join it. That would be reckless. Just follow it. Understand what's being said. Get a sense of the topic. Maybe even learn something. This is your third mistake. You focus on a group nearby. One man is speaking loudly, clearly very invested in whatever point he's making. The others nod, interrupt, disagree, agree again. It's a full performance. You lean slightly closer. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to listen. And for a brief moment it works. You catch fragments. Something about work. Then something about money. Then suddenly, politics. Or maybe it was always politics. In Rome, it usually is. You try to connect the pieces, you really do. But the conversation moves too fast. Sentences are interrupted halfway through. Points are abandoned. New arguments appear with no warning. At one point, two people are clearly disagreeing. At another point, they're laughing. At another point, they're both talking at the same time with full confidence that they are being understood. They are not, and neither are you. You nod slightly again. This has become your default reaction. A universal signal that says, yes, I am following this, even when you absolutely are not. Then someone turns toward you. Brief eye contact. A pause. And for a terrifying second, it looks like you might be pulled into the conversation. You are not prepared for this. You immediately take a sip of wine. Strategically. A very committed sip. The kind that signals, I would respond, but I am currently occupied. It works. They turn back. You survive. You step back slightly, reconsidering your choices. And this is when you realize something important. Conversations here are not meant to be followed in a structured way. They are experienced. They flow. They overlap. They exist more as energy than as clear communication. People aren't always trying to make perfect sense. They're expressing, reacting, participating. And suddenly, your confusion feels less like failure and more like accuracy. Because in a place like this, understanding everything is not the goal. Being part of the moment is, even if that moment makes absolutely no sense. And as you stand there, listening again, but now with lower expectations, you realize something. You're not supposed to follow the conversation. You're supposed to survive it. At some point, your attention shifts again, because just when you think you've understood the rhythm of this place, you notice something happening in the corner. A small group has formed around a table, not eating, not really drinking, focused, very focused. You lean slightly to get a better view, carefully, because you've learned that sudden movements here tend to result in accidental collisions with strangers. What you see is simple. Dice. Small, worn, passed from hand to hand, like they've been doing this all day. Coins on the table. Not many, but enough. One man rolls, the others watch closely. Too closely. There's a pause, then reactions. Some satisfied, some not. And immediately, you understand. This is not just a game. This is a situation. You watch for a moment, then another, and quickly realize that this is operating under a completely different set of rules than the rest of the tavern. The noise around it fades slightly, not because it's quieter, but because the focus is sharper, voices lower, eyes locked on the outcome, hands moving quickly, coins shifting from one side of the table to the other. You consider stepping closer, just to see better, just to understand. And then you notice something important. The tension. It's subtle, but it's there. A wrong move, a bad roll, a disagreement about what just happened. And this becomes something else entirely. Something louder, something less controlled. You've already seen how quickly conversations turn into arguments. This has more at stake. You take another sip of wine, thoughtfully, and make a decision. You will observe from a distance, because joining would require confidence and understanding. You currently have neither. Someone laughs sharply, not a happy laugh. A this is fine, but not really fine kind of laugh. Another roll happens, more coins move, and you realize something. This isn't about winning, not entirely. It's about risk, about proving something, about the moment when chance decides something important, even if nobody can clearly define what that is. And suddenly, the appeal makes sense. Not enough for you to join, but enough for you to respect the choice. You step back slightly, recentering yourself in the safer chaos of the tavern. And as you glance back one more time, watching another roll, another reaction, another shift in mood, you realize something important. In Rome, even relaxation has tension. And sometimes, the smartest move is knowing when not to play. It starts like everything else in this tavern, as a conversation. You don't even notice it at first, just another voice slightly louder than the others. Another opinion delivered with confidence. Another person responding a little too quickly. Normal, very normal. Then something shifts. Not dramatically, just enough. One voice gets sharper, another gets louder. You turn slightly, not because you want to get involved, but because your instincts are telling you this is about to become something. And in Rome, something usually means stay alert. Two men are facing each other now. Not aggressively, not yet, but the space between them feels different, tighter, more focused. The conversation has stopped being shared. It's now directed, back and forth, faster, shorter sentences, more gestures. A hand moves, not striking, just emphasizing, but a little too forcefully. You take a small step back, subtle, casual, like you're just adjusting your position. You are not. You are creating distance, because this is the moment where things can go either way. And based on everything you've seen so far, they usually don't go the calm way. Voices rise, not gradually, immediately. The kind of volume that cuts through the rest of the tavern noise and pulls attention without asking permission. People nearby turn slightly, not surprised, just aware, like this is part of the environment, which apparently it is. One man laughs, not a friendly laugh, a sharp one, the kind that says, "You are wrong, and I am enjoying telling you that." The other does not appreciate this. At all. More gestures, more words, less patience. And now the tension is visible. You can feel it, even without understanding what started it. Because it doesn't matter what started it. It matters where it's going. You tighten your grip on your cup slightly, not because you're nervous, just prepared. The argument peaks. For a second it feels like something more is about to happen. A push, a strike, a decision. And then it doesn't. One man steps back, the other shakes his head. Someone else interrupts. The energy shifts, not resolved, just redirected. And just like that, it's over. The noise returns to normal. The tavern absorbs the moment like it never happened. You exhale slightly, not dramatically, just enough to notice. And you realize something important. This wasn't unusual. This wasn't shocking. This was expected. Because in a place like this, arguments aren't interruptions. They're part of the atmosphere. And the fact that it didn't turn into something worse, that's considered a good outcome. You take another sip of wine, slightly more aware now, because you've learned something valuable. In Rome, things escalate quickly, but they also settle quickly. And your job isn't to understand why. It's to stay out of the center of it. At some point, the noise changes. Not in volume. That would be too easy. But in tone. You start noticing clusters of quieter conversations. Not silent. Nothing here is ever silent. But more controlled, more focused. You lean slightly, just enough to catch fragments. And this is when you realize something important. This is where information lives. Not official information. Not verified, but the kind of information that moves faster than anything written. Gossip. You hear a name, then another. Someone mentions a magistrate. Someone else reacts immediately like this is not new information, just newly confirmed. You listen more carefully now. A story unfolds, not in a straight line, never in a straight line. Pieces of it come from different voices, different directions. Someone claims something happened. Someone else adds detail. Someone else questions it. Someone else confirms it with complete confidence despite clearly not being there. And somehow, the story forms anyway. You don't know if it's true. No one here really knows if it's true. But that doesn't matter, because what matters is that people believe it might be. And in Rome, that's enough. You hear something about politics, a decision, a rumour of change, a possible scandal. You don't catch everything, but you catch enough to understand the pattern. This is how news travels, not through announcements, through repetition, through conversation, through people standing exactly where you are, holding exactly what you're holding, listening exactly like you are. You notice how quickly reactions spread. One person laughs, another looks concerned, another leans in closer. The emotional response moves just as fast as the information itself, and suddenly you understand something. This isn't just random talk. This is influence, opinions forming in real time, reputations shifting, stories evolving with every retelling, and nobody is writing any of it down. You take a slow sip of your wine, thinking, because now the tavern feels different. Not just loud, not just chaotic, but connected. Like this room is part of something bigger, a network, a system, where information moves through people instead of structures. And as you listen a little longer, catching another name, another reaction, another version of the same story, you realize something important. You may not know what's true, but you're hearing what people believe. And in Rome, that's often more powerful. At some point, your attention shifts again. Not to the crowd, not to the noise, but to the people behind the counter. Because while everything around you feels chaotic, unpredictable, and slightly one argument away from becoming a story, they are calm. Very calm. Almost suspiciously calm. You watch them for a moment. Carefully. Because unlike everyone else here, they are not reacting. They are operating. Serving wine. Passing food. Taking coins. Moving from one person to the next with efficiency that suggests they've done this hundreds of times. Possibly thousands. Someone pushes forward aggressively. They don't respond emotionally. They just serve the next person. Someone complains. They don't engage. They move on. Someone laughs too loudly, knocks something over, creates a minor disturbance. They barely look up. It's not indifference, it's experience. Because this is not new to them. None of this is new. You start noticing small details, the way they anticipate orders before they're spoken, the way they position themselves to avoid collisions, the way they keep track of who has paid and who hasn't without writing anything down. It's controlled. Not in the sense that they control the tavern. No one controls the tavern, but they control their part of it. And that's enough. At one point, you make eye contact, brief, accidental. And in that moment, you get the distinct impression that they understand exactly what you are. Not irregular, not part of the usual rhythm. Someone still adjusting. They don't judge you. They don't acknowledge it. But they know. And then they move on. Because there are more important things to do. More people to serve. More cups to fill. More moments to manage. And suddenly, you understand something important. This place works because of them. Not because of the crowd. Not because of the noise. But because someone is quietly keeping it functional. Making sure the chaos doesn't collapse into something worse. And as you watch them continue, steady, efficient, completely unfazed, you realize something. While everyone else is reacting, they've already seen the outcome. Because in a place like this, patterns repeat. Arguments come and go. Conversations rise and fall. But the work stays the same. And the people doing it, they're the only ones not surprised by anything. Which, in Rome, is probably the closest thing to control you're going to find. At first, everything felt overwhelming. Then it felt manageable. Now, it starts to feel different again. Subtle at first, then very noticeable. You don't see the change. You feel it. The noise is still there. The crowd is still packed. But something underneath it all shifts. The rhythm breaks. People start talking louder. Not just energetic loud, confident loud. The kind of loud that comes from a few drinks too many, and a growing belief that every opinion you have is suddenly correct. You recognize the tone immediately. Because it spreads. One table gets louder. Then another. Then someone laughs too aggressively at something that wasn't that funny. And now the entire space feels slightly unstable. You take a sip of your wine. Slower this time. More aware. Because earlier, this felt like chaos. Now it feels like chaos with momentum. People move differently. Less careful. More direct. Someone bumps into you and doesn't notice. Or doesn't care. You're not sure which is worse. A group nearby starts talking over each other. Not arguing. Not yet. But getting closer. Another table cheers for something that doesn't involve you but still affects the volume of your existence. You glance toward the games again. The stakes feel higher now. The reactions sharper. The laughter shorter. Everything is just slightly more intense. And this is when you realize something important. This is the turning point. The moment where a tavern stops being social and starts becoming unpredictable. Not dangerous. Not necessarily. But less controlled. More reactive. You adjust your stance again. Instinctively. You're more aware of your surroundings now. Where people are standing. Who's moving. Where the exits are. Casual awareness. Very casual. But deliberate. You notice others doing the same. Small shifts. Subtle repositioning. People adapting without acknowledging it. Because this isn't unusual. This is expected. This is what happens when the evening progresses. When the wine settles in. When conversations lose structure. When confidence rises faster than logic. And as you stand there, slightly more alert, slightly more grounded, watching the energy shift around you, you understand something clearly. This place has phases, and you've just entered the next one, where things are still under control, but only just. And in Rome, only just is usually your signal to stay aware. At this point, you're no longer just experiencing the tavern. You're navigating it. There's a difference. Earlier, everything felt new, loud, overwhelming. Now it feels readable, not predictable, never predictable, but understandable enough that you start making small adjustments without thinking about them. You shift your stance slightly so you're not boxed in. You keep your back angled, not fully exposed. You hold your cup a little closer, not just casually, but intentionally. And then you check your belongings. Quickly, subtly, like you're just adjusting your clothing. You're not. You're confirming everything is still there. Because by now, you've noticed something. Not everyone here is just drinking. Some people are watching. Not in an obvious way. In a practiced way. Eyes moving, hands steady, positioning themselves near the crowd, not inside it. You don't stare. You don't react. You just register it and adjust. Because this place may feel social, but it's also efficient. And efficiency works both ways. The same environment that allows conversations, games, and deals also allows opportunities. Small ones, quick ones, the kind you only notice after they've already happened. Someone brushes past you again. This time, you notice. Not aggressively, just aware. Your posture shifts slightly. More grounded, more controlled. You're not tense, but you're no longer relaxed either. You've found something in between. And as you scan the space, casually, like you're just taking in the atmosphere, you start noticing others doing the same. People adjusting, people watching, people reacting before things happen instead of after. It's subtle, but it's everywhere. Because this isn't just a place where things happen. It's a place where people expect things to happen. And that expectation shapes behaviour. You take another sip of your wine, slower now, measured. Not because you're enjoying it more, but because you're pacing yourself. Because staying here is no longer just about being part of the experience, it's about managing it. And as you stand there, fully aware now of the noise, the movement, the small shifts happening all around you, you realize something important. You've adapted. Not completely. Not comfortably. But enough. Enough to stay. Enough to understand. Enough to leave when you need to. And in a place like this, that's exactly the level of awareness you want. Because anything more would be exhausting. And anything less would be a mistake. As the evening moves forward, something changes again. Not the place. The people. You start noticing new faces. Not entirely new. Some of them may have been here the whole time. But they feel different. Looser. Less structured. More confident than the situation probably justifies. This is the late crowd. And they arrive with a very specific energy. You spot them almost immediately. The louder voices. The bigger gestures. The people who laugh before the joke is finished, and then repeat the joke louder just to make sure everyone heard it. They move through the tavern like they own it. They do not, but they believe they do, which, in this environment, is almost the same thing. You watch one group push through the crowd, not aggressively, just confidently. Space opens for them. Not because people want to move, but because it's easier than resisting. They reach the counter, order quickly, drink faster, and within moments they are fully integrated into the noise, except they are not following it. They are raising it. You take a step slightly to the side, instinctively, because you've already learned how this works. Energy spreads, and this kind spreads fast. Conversations nearby become louder, more animated, less controlled. You notice someone telling a story again, but now with exaggerated gestures, wider movements, louder delivery. Accuracy has officially left the building. Confidence remains. And then there's the laughter. Not relaxed laughter. Sharp, sudden, slightly unbalanced. The kind that starts strong and ends abruptly. You don't judge. You observe. Because by now, you understand something important. This is the natural progression. This is what happens when time passes and wine accumulates. The earlier crowd adapts, the later crowd accelerates, and somewhere in the middle, the atmosphere shifts again. Not into chaos, but closer to it. You keep your position steady, not too close, not too far. You've found a balance, a safe distance from the center of the noise, and as you watch the late arrivals fully take over the rhythm of the tavern, louder, faster, more confident than the space can comfortably hold, you realize something. They are not adjusting to the environment. They are overwhelming it, temporarily. And everyone else? They either adapt or move. You choose to adapt, carefully. Because by now, you understand the most important rule of this place. It's not about controlling the experience. It's about staying aligned with it, even when it becomes slightly ridiculous. Which, at this stage, it definitely has. At some point, without a clear moment of realization, something shifts inside you. Not around you, inside you. Because the noise is still there. The crowd is still packed. The wine is still what it is. And yet, it all starts to make sense. Not logically. You're not suddenly analyzing the social structure of Roman taverns. You're not breaking down behavior patterns like a scholar. You just get it. You watch the people around you again. But this time, differently. The workers who came here after a long day, not for luxury, but for release. The soldiers, half relaxed, half alert, existing in that space between duty and exhaustion. The groups laughing too loudly, not because everything is funny, but because it feels good to let go. Even the arguments, even the chaos. It all fits. Because this isn't about the wine. It's not about the food. It's not even about comfort. It's about something much simpler and much more necessary. Connection. Not polite conversation, not structured interaction. Real, immediate, unfiltered connection. The kind that doesn't require introductions or expectations. or effort. You don't need to know anyone here. You just need to be present. And suddenly, the lack of personal space makes sense. The noise makes sense. Even the unpredictability makes sense. Because all of it creates something that the rest of the city doesn't offer. A place where everything is happening at once, and you're part of it, whether you plan to be or not. You take another sip of your wine, and this time, you don't analyze it. You don't compare it. You just drink it. Because now it feels appropriate. You glance around again, and for the first time since you arrived, you're not observing the tavern like an outsider. You're inside the rhythm of it. Not perfectly, not naturally, but enough. Enough to understand why people return, again and again. Because in a city as structured, demanding, and constantly moving as Rome, places like this matter. They're not refined, they're not controlled, but they're real. And sometimes, that's exactly what people are looking for. Even if it comes with noise, chaos, and wine you don't fully trust. At some point you decide it's time. Not because the tavern tells you. It doesn't. It would happily continue without you for hours, possibly days. But something in you reaches a limit. Not exhaustion, not discomfort. Just enough. You shift your weight, angle your body, and begin the process of leaving. Which, like entering, is not something you do alone. You don't step out. You are gradually released. You move with the crowd, not against it. Small adjustments, slight turns, quiet negotiations of space that no one acknowledges but everyone understands. Someone brushes past you. Someone else steps into the space you just left before you've fully left it. There is no pause. No gap. The tavern closes behind you before you're even outside. And then, air. Real air. Cooler. Cleaner. Noticeably less shared. You step onto the street and for a moment you just stand there. Letting the noise fade. Not completely. You can still hear it behind you. Laughter. Voices. The constant hum of life packed into a single space. But now it's distant. Manageable. You take a breath. A proper one. And something feels different. Not the city. Rome is still Rome. Still loud. Still crowded. Still moving with the same restless energy. But your perception has shifted. Because now you've seen what happens inside. Behind the street. Beyond the structure. You've experienced the part of Rome that doesn't organize itself. That doesn't present itself neatly. That simply exists. And continues existing whether you understand it or not. You glance back at the tavern, just for a second. People still moving in and out. No sign that anything has changed. Because nothing has, except you. You adjust your clothing slightly, instinctively checking that everything is still where it should be. Good. You start walking again, back into the flow of the city, and as the tavern disappears behind you, blending back into the street like it was never separate from it at all, you realize something. You didn't just visit a tavern. You stepped into a version of Rome that most people only hear about. Loud, messy, unfiltered, real. And now that you've seen it, the rest of the city feels just a little more understandable and slightly less polite. You arrive in a world where marriage is not about love. Not really. Not in the way you might hope. As Marco Polo journeys across the vast dominions of Kublai Khan, he records customs that feel both logical and unsettling. Marriage, in these lands, is not a personal story. It is a political move. Quiet, calculated, and often decided long before the people involved can speak for themselves. You quickly realize that unions are arranged with the precision of a trade deal. Families sit together, not to discuss feelings, but to measure advantage. Wealth, reputation, alliances, these are the true ingredients of a marriage. Love is not entirely dismissed, but it is treated like an optional luxury, something that might grow later, like an afterthought. You watch as a young girl is prepared for a man she has never met. Her family speaks for her. They negotiate her future the way merchants negotiate silk or spices. The agreement is sealed not with romance, but with approval from elders who understand the stakes. Because in this world, marriage is not just about two lives. It is about the survival and elevation of an entire family. Men, too, are expected to comply, though they often have slightly more say. Still, their choices are rarely their own. A son who refuses an arranged match risks more than embarrassment. He risks weakening his family's position. And in an empire where power shifts like sand, that is a dangerous gamble. Marco Polo describes unions that secure peace between rival groups, strengthen trade connections, or bind powerful houses together. A single wedding can silence conflict or create opportunity across entire regions. You begin to understand that marriage here is less about companionship and more about control. And yet, as the ceremony unfolds before you, something feels almost eerily calm. The bride stands composed, her expression unreadable, not because she is unfeeling, but because she has been taught to accept this moment as inevitable. There is no dramatic resistance, no whispered declarations of forbidden love, only acceptance. Because in this world, marriage is not where love begins. It is where duty takes over. You might assume one wife is complicated enough, but here, one is often just the beginning. As Marco Polo continues his journey through the courts and cities of Kublai Khan, he encounters a system that quietly reshapes everything you thought you understood about marriage: polygamy. For powerful men, especially among Mongol elites and wealthy households, having multiple wives is not unusual. In fact, it is expected. The more influence a man holds, the more marriages he can maintain, each one serving a purpose beyond companionship. You begin to see the pattern quickly. Each wife represents an alliance. One may come from a noble family, strengthening political ties. Another might be chosen for her beauty or fertility. Another still may connect distant regions of the empire, turning marriage into a living network of loyalty. This is not chaos. It is strategy. And within this system, hierarchy matters. Not all wives are equal. There is often a principal wife, the one with the highest status, whose children may inherit power and whose voice carries weight within the household. The others exist in carefully managed layers beneath her, each aware of her position. You can almost feel the quiet tension beneath the surface, because while this structure appears stable, it depends entirely on balance. Favoritism can shift everything. A husband's attention is not just emotional, it is political. To be favored means influence. To be ignored means fading into irrelevance. Marco Polo notes how these households operate with surprising order. Roles are defined. Expectations are clear. Jealousy, while inevitable, is something that must be controlled, not expressed openly, because disorder within the household could ripple outward, affecting alliances far beyond its walls. And then there are the children. Many wives mean many heirs, but not all sons are equal. Their status depends on their mother's rank, creating a quiet competition that begins from birth. You realize that even childhood here is shaped by hierarchy and ambition. Standing there, observing this world, you begin to understand something deeper. Marriage is not a private bond. It is a structure of power. Every relationship is layered with purpose. Every connection is calculated. And affection, when it appears, must find its place within a system that was never designed for it. Because here, love does not define marriage. Power does. You begin to notice something unsettling. In this world, a bride is not just a person stepping into a new life. She is an offering. As Marco Polo moves across courts, steppe encampments, and thriving trade cities, he records a pattern that becomes impossible for you to ignore. Women, especially daughters of influential families, are often used as instruments of negotiation, their marriages sealing deals that words alone cannot guarantee. You watch as a father speaks proudly of his daughter's future, not her happiness, not her desires, but the alliance she will create, the peace she will secure, the advantage she will bring. And suddenly, it becomes clear. She is not leaving her family. She is being exchanged. In many regions, When two powers wish to avoid conflict or strengthen trust, they do not simply sign agreements. They bind themselves through marriage. A daughter is sent away, not just as a wife, but as a living guarantee that neither side will betray the other. Because once bloodlines are connected, betrayal becomes far more complicated. You begin to understand why these unions are treated with such gravity. A marriage can end wars before they begin. It can open trade routes, secure borders, and create obligations that stretch across vast distances. But for the bride, this is not strategy. This is her life. Marco Polo describes journeys where young women travel hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles to reach their future husbands. They leave behind everything familiar, language, customs, even climate, stepping into a world where they must adapt quickly or risk isolation. You can almost feel the weight of it. No turning back, no negotiation, only expectation. And yet, these women are not always powerless. Some learn to navigate their new roles with quiet intelligence. They build influence within their households, shaping decisions from behind the scenes. In certain cases, they become key figures in maintaining the very alliances they were sent to secure. Still, the foundation remains the same. Their marriages were never truly their own. As you stand there, watching another bride depart her home, surrounded by ceremony and gifts, the atmosphere feels almost celebratory. But beneath it lies something more complicated, a quiet understanding shared by everyone present. This is not just a wedding. This is a transaction. And in this world, the price of peace is often paid in daughters. You begin to notice that not all marriages are created equal. Some are grand, almost theatrical, filled with silk, gold, and endless ceremony. Others are quieter, simpler, arranged with far less negotiation, and the difference between them is not love, it is status. As Marco Polo continues documenting life across the empire of Kublai Khan, he makes one thing very clear. Who you marry defines where you stand in the world. You see it immediately in the preparations. A noble bride is adorned in layers of fine fabric, her presence almost symbolic of her family's power. Her wedding is not just an event, it is a display. Guests are chosen carefully, gifts are extravagant. Every detail whispers the same message: this family matters. But step just outside that circle, and the picture changes. For common people, marriage is still important, but it lacks the same grandeur. The focus shifts from alliance building to survival. A good marriage means stability, another pair of hands, shared resources, a slightly better chance of enduring harsh seasons. Still, even here, status plays its role. Families try to marry within their rank or just above it. A small step upward can change everything. A poor match, however, can drag a family down for generations. You realize that marriage is one of the few ways people can attempt to move within the rigid structure of society. And so, every decision carries weight. Marco Polo describes how beauty, reputation, and family background all factor into a bride's value. It's not spoken crudely, but the meaning is clear. A well-born woman can elevate a man's standing. A poorly matched union can quietly damage it. Men, too, are judged. Their wealth, their connections, their ability to provide, all of it is examined before any agreement is reached. Because in this world, marriage is not a gamble. It is an investment. You start to see how deeply this thinking runs. Even affection is influenced by status. Respect within a marriage often mirrors the rank each partner brings into it. A high-born wife commands attention. A lower-born one may find herself overlooked, regardless of her personality or intelligence. Standing there, watching another carefully orchestrated union, you realize something unsettling. People are not just choosing partners, they are choosing position. And in a society where every step up or down matters, marriage becomes less about who you love, and more about where you belong. By now, you've seen enough to understand the pattern. Marriage comes first. Love is optional. As Marco Polo continues his observations across the lands ruled by Kublai Khan, he rarely speaks of romance in the way you might expect. There are no grand declarations, no desperate pursuits, no stories built around passion. Instead, there is structure, obligation, quiet acceptance, and yet, love is not entirely absent. It simply arrives differently. You begin to notice it in small, almost invisible ways. A glance held a second longer than necessary. A softened tone between husband and wife. The subtle shift from formality to familiarity over time. In a world where marriages are arranged, affection is something that must grow, slowly, carefully, and without disrupting the balance that the union was meant to maintain. Sometimes it never comes, and that too is understood. A marriage can function perfectly well without love. As long as duties are fulfilled, roles respected, and alliances maintained, the system works. Children are raised, households are stable, families remain connected. From the outside, everything appears successful. But you can't help wondering what happens inside. Marco Polo hints at relationships where companionship does develop, where shared experience, mutual respect, and time create a kind of quiet bond. It is not the intense, consuming love you might imagine, but something steadier. Something built rather than discovered. Still, there are limits. Emotional expression is often restrained. Too much affection could be seen as weakness or even distraction from responsibility. You realize that even love, when it exists, must fit within the expectations of the system. And then there are the unspoken stories, feelings that never find a place, attachments formed outside of marriage, moments of longing that are quickly buried beneath duty. These are not recorded openly, but you sense them lingering beneath the surface, like something quietly endured rather than expressed. Standing there, watching a couple sit side by side, not touching, not speaking, yet somehow accustomed to each other, you begin to understand. In this world, love is not the foundation of marriage. It is a possibility, something that may grow over time, or something that may never arrive at all. At first it seems simple. Women are married, moved, positioned. But the longer you watch, the more you realize that's not the full story. As Marco Polo continues through the courts of Kublai Khan, he notes something subtle, something easy to miss if you only look at the surface. The women may not choose the marriage, but they often shape what happens after it. You begin to see it in the quiet spaces, inside tents, behind screens, within private chambers where decisions are softened, redirected, or quietly influenced. A wife may not sit in the council, but her voice can still reach it, especially the principal wife. Her position gives her more than status. It gives her access. She manages the household, controls resources, oversees servants, and most importantly, influences her husband's perspective. A suggestion made in private can carry more weight than a command given in public. And in a world built on hierarchy, that kind of influence is power. You notice how carefully this power is used, rarely openly, rarely directly. Instead, it moves through conversations, timing, and trust. A well-placed word at the right moment can shift alliances, affect decisions, or protect children's futures. Because within these marriages, the stakes are never just emotional, they are political. Marco Polo describes households where women maintain internal order, ensuring that multiple wives, children, and servants coexist without open conflict. It is not an easy role. It requires awareness, restraint, and a constant reading of tension beneath the surface. Because one mistake could unravel everything. Jealousy, rivalry, favoritism, all of it must be managed quietly, not eliminated, but controlled. You realize that survival here is not just about obedience, it is about intelligence, and some women master it. They learn how to navigate their position, how to protect their interests, how to build influence without appearing to seek it. Over time, they become more than participants in a system. They become operators within it. Still, there are limits. Their power depends on their husband's favour, their status, and the fragile balance of the household. It can grow, but it can also disappear just as quickly. Standing there, observing from the edges of this world, you begin to understand something deeper. These women are not simply controlled by marriage, they are quietly controlling parts of it. Not in the open, but in the spaces where power is hardest to see and hardest to challenge. You might assume that once a marriage is arranged, it is permanent, unbreakable, but that isn't entirely true. As Marco Polo continues his journey through the vast territories ruled by Kublai Khan, he encounters something you didn't expect: marriages that end. Not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly, and often with very little resistance. In many parts of the Mongol world, marriage is important, but it is not sacred in the same rigid sense you might imagine. If a union no longer serves its purpose, it can be dissolved. A husband may send a wife away. A family may withdraw support. In some cases, separation happens simply because the arrangement no longer benefits either side, and that's the key word: benefit. You begin to understand that just as marriages are formed for strategic reasons, they can also be ended for the same reasons. If alliances shift, if power changes hands, or if expectations are not met, the relationship itself can be reconsidered. It feels transactional. A wife who fails to produce children may find her position weakened. One who loses favour may be quietly set aside. In polygamous households, this process can be even more subtle. A woman is not always formally dismissed, but her importance fades. She becomes present, but no longer significant. And yet, it's not always one-sided. In some regions, women have the ability to leave as well, especially if they retain support from their family. A return to her original household is not necessarily a disgrace. It is simply another shift in arrangement. Marco Polo notes that remarriage is not uncommon. Life continues. New alliances are formed. The system adjusts. There is no grand tragedy attached to it, at least not publicly. But as you stand there, watching a woman prepare to leave a household she once entered with ceremony, you can't help but feel the quiet weight of it. There are no tears on display, no dramatic confrontations. Only the steady movement of servants packing belongings, the calm exchange of final words. It ends the same way it began, with order. Because in this world, marriage is not meant to last forever. It is meant to last as long as it is useful, and when it is no longer useful, it simply ends. By now, you might think you understand how marriage works here, but then you travel a little farther, and everything shifts again. As Marco Polo moves across Asia, from Mongol steppe to Persian cities, from Indian kingdoms to Chinese courts under Kublai Khan, he notices something striking. There is no single way to marry. Each region reshapes the idea entirely. In some areas, polygamy dominates. In others, monogamy is more common. Some societies emphasize strict hierarchy within marriage, while others allow more flexibility. The structure changes, but the purpose remains strangely consistent. Marriage still serves society first. You begin to feel how vast this world really is. In certain Persian and Central Asian regions, customs blend tradition with religion. Marriage contracts are formal, negotiated carefully, often involving detailed agreements about wealth, responsibilities, and expectations. It feels more structured, almost legalistic, yet still rooted in family control. Move further east, and the tone shifts again. In parts of China, influenced by long-standing traditions, marriage becomes deeply ritualized. Astrology may determine compatibility. Ceremonies follow precise steps, each symbol carrying meaning. The union is not just between two people, or even two families. It is aligned with cosmic order. And yet, even here, personal choice remains limited. Then you hear of regions where practices feel even more unfamiliar. In some communities, women may have more than one partner over time, or relationships may follow customs shaped by local survival needs rather than rigid rules. The further you travel, the more you realize that normal is a fragile concept. Marco Polo, doesn't judge these differences outright. He observes them, records them, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with quiet confusion. And you find yourself doing the same. Because no matter how different the customs appear, a pattern keeps returning. Marriage is always tied to something larger: family, wealth, power, religion, survival. Love, when it exists, must adapt to whatever structure surrounds it. Standing at the edge of yet another unfamiliar ceremony, you begin to understand something deeper. There is no universal definition of marriage, only variations of the same idea, a bond shaped not by what people feel, but by what their world demands. By now, you've seen enough to understand the truth. Marriage, in this world, is not about happiness. It is about survival. As Marco Polo reflects on the vast lands he has crossed under the rule of Kublai Khan, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Whether among nomadic steppe tribes, wealthy merchant families, or imperial courts, marriage is always tied to something larger than the individuals involved. It protects, it connects, it sustains. You begin to see how fragile life can be in the 13th century. Travel is dangerous, power shifts quickly, resources are not guaranteed. In such a world, standing alone is a risk few can afford. Marriage becomes a shield. Through it, families secure allies. They create networks of support that stretch across regions and cultures. A daughter married into another household is not just gone, she becomes a bridge. A son who marries wisely strengthens the position of everyone connected to him. This is not romance. This is strategy for survival. Even at the most basic level, marriage ensures continuity. Children are not just desired, they are necessary. They carry on names, inherit responsibilities, and maintain the structure that keeps families from fading into irrelevance. You realize that without marriage, many of these systems would collapse. And so, expectations are built around it from the very beginning of life. You are raised knowing your role, prepared for it, conditioned to accept it. Not because you lack imagination, but because the world leaves little room for alternatives. Marco Polo does not present this as cruel. He presents it as normal, because to the people living within it, it is normal. And that is perhaps the most striking part. Standing there, watching yet another union formed not by passion, but by necessity, you begin to feel the distance between your world and theirs. What feels restrictive to you feels stable to them. What feels impersonal to you feels secure, because in a time where uncertainty is constant, predictability becomes valuable. And marriage provides exactly that. Not excitement, not freedom, but structure. And as you step back from it all, one final realization settles in. In the world Marco Polo witnessed, marriage was not about finding love. It was about making sure life could continue at all. You fall in love, and then they leave. Not for a few days, not for a season, but for years. In the medieval world, distance is not measured in kilometers. It is measured in uncertainty. Roads are dangerous, messages are rare, and time stretches in a way that feels almost unbearable. When someone leaves, there is no guarantee they will return. You watch as a young man departs for war, trade, or pilgrimage. He promises to come back. He always does. But promises here are fragile things. A storm, a band of thieves, a sudden illness. Any one of these can erase him from the world without warning, and you would never know. There are no letters arriving every week, no instant news. At best, a message might come months later, carried by someone who barely remembers his face. At worst, nothing comes at all. So you wait. And waiting becomes its own kind of life. You begin to understand that long-distance relationships in this world are not built on communication. They are built on memory. You hold on to the last words spoken, the last glance, the last moment you stood together. You repeat it in your mind, over and over, as if that alone can keep the connection alive. But memory is not stable. It fades. It changes. It begins to feel less like reality and more like something imagined. You start to question it. Did they really say they would return? Did they mean it? Are they even alive? There is no way to check. And that uncertainty slowly becomes part of the relationship itself. Some people remain loyal for years, holding on to hope with quiet determination. Others begin to let go. Not because they want to, but because life does not pause. Responsibilities remain. Families expect decisions. Time moves forward, whether love keeps up or not. You realize that distance in this world is not just physical, it is emotional. Every day apart stretches the bond thinner, testing whether it can survive without presence, without reassurance, without proof. And as you stand there, watching someone stare down an empty road, long after their loved one has disappeared from view, you begin to understand something deeply uncomfortable. In the medieval world, love was not destroyed by betrayal. It was destroyed by silence. You fall in love. And then they leave. Not for a few days, not for a season, but for years. In the medieval world, distance is not measured in miles. It is measured in silence. Roads are unpredictable, messages are rare, and once someone disappears over the horizon, they might as well have vanished into another world. You stand there as they go, watching until they are no longer visible. They promise to return. They always do. The words sound certain, almost comforting. But even as you hear them, you understand something unspoken. There are no guarantees. A journey in this world is never just a journey. It is a gamble. War, disease, storms, bandits. The road is filled with quiet threats that do not announce themselves. A traveller can be delayed, lost, or simply erased without explanation, and you would never know which. Weeks pass, then months. You wait. At first it feels manageable. You hold on to the last memory of them, the way they spoke, the way they looked at you before leaving. You replay it again and again, as if repeating it enough times might keep it from fading. But memory is not reliable. It begins to shift. Small details blur, their voice becomes less clear, their face less precise. You start to wonder if you are remembering them as they were, or as you need them to be. And still, no word arrives. In rare moments, a message might appear, carried by a traveller, scribbled hastily, sometimes weeks or months old by the time it reaches you. It offers little comfort, a few lines, a vague promise, proof that they were alive, once. But what about now? You begin to understand that long-distance love here is not built on communication. It is built on faith. Faith that they are still out there. Faith that they remember you. Faith that they will return, even when every passing day makes that belief harder to hold. Some people wait. Years can pass, and they remain loyal, anchored to a promise that may or may not still exist. Others cannot. Life continues, and waiting becomes a burden too heavy to carry forever. Standing there, watching the road long after it has emptied, you realize something quietly devastating. In this world, love does not end with goodbye. It fades, in the space where no words ever arrive. At first, you wait for a message. It feels like the most natural thing in the world. Of course they will write. Of course you will hear from them. The connection isn't broken, just stretched. But in the medieval world, a letter is not a certainty. It is a risk. You begin to understand how fragile communication really is. There is no organized system that guarantees delivery, no fixed routes, no deadlines. A letter must be carried by someone, a merchant, a pilgrim, a soldier, anyone willing to take it along their journey. And that journey is never safe. Bandits may steal it, weather may destroy it, the messenger may forget, delay, or simply decide it is not worth the trouble. A single piece of parchment must survive countless unknowns just to reach you, and most never do. So you wait. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. Each time someone approaches from the road, your attention sharpens. You wonder, is this the moment? Did they send word? Did they remember? Sometimes you are lucky. A letter arrives, worn and creased, its edges softened by travel. You hold it carefully, almost afraid to open it, because once you do, that small piece of connection will begin to fade again. The words are brief. They have to be. Ink is expensive, space is limited, and the messenger cannot wait forever. So the letter says just enough to reassure you. I am well. I think of you. I will return. Simple phrases, carrying more weight than they were ever meant to hold. You read it once, then again, until the words begin to lose their shape, memorized so completely that they no longer feel new. But even this comfort is temporary, because a letter proves only one thing, that at some point in the past they were alive and thinking of you. It says nothing about now, and so the waiting begins again. You realize that communication here is not continuous. It comes in fragments, separated by long stretches of silence. Each message is like a flicker of light in the dark, brief, uncertain, and impossible to hold on to for long. Standing there, holding a letter that is already weeks old, you begin to understand something deeply frustrating. In this world, even when love finds a way to speak, it is always speaking from the past. When letters fail, something else takes their place. Rumours. At first, you cling to any piece of information you can find. A traveller passes through. A merchant arrives from a distant region. A soldier returns from the same road your loved one once took. You listen carefully. Because in the medieval world, news does not arrive cleanly. It travels through voices, shaped and reshaped with every telling. By the time it reaches you, it is no longer certain, only possible. And yet, it is all you have. You hear that a caravan was attacked. You hear that a group of travellers made it safely across the mountains. You hear that war has broken out near the place they were heading. None of it is confirmed. All of it matters. You begin to piece together fragments, trying to build a picture of what might have happened. But the more you listen, the more confusing it becomes. One person's story contradicts another. Details shift. Names are forgotten. Locations blur. And still, you ask questions, because silence is worse. Marco Polo himself, the great traveller, often relied on second-hand accounts, stories told by others, filtered through distance and time. Even he could not always separate truth from exaggeration. And if someone like him struggled, what chance do you have? You realize that information here is not reliable. It is emotional. You believe what gives you hope. You fear what confirms your worst thoughts. Every rumour becomes a possibility, and every possibility begins to feel real. A single sentence can change everything. They were seen alive. Or, they never made it. And just like that, your entire world shifts. You start to notice how people around you react differently. Some dismiss rumours entirely, refusing to believe anything without proof. Others cling to them, repeating the same story as if saying it enough times might make it true. You find yourself somewhere in between, unable to trust, unable to ignore. Standing there, listening to yet another uncertain story, you begin to understand something deeply unsettling. In this world, truth is not something you receive. It is something you chase, through voices that may not even know it themselves. And in the absence of certainty, love is forced to survive on something far more fragile than reality. It survives on what might be true. At some point, waiting stops feeling temporary. It becomes your life. What began as a pause, a space between departure and return, slowly stretches into something permanent. Days no longer feel like steps toward reunion. They feel like something you must endure, one after another, without knowing where they lead. You wake up, and they are still gone. You sleep, and they are still gone. And somewhere along the way, you stop asking when they will return, and start wondering if they ever will. You begin to build your life around absence. There are responsibilities that cannot wait forever. Work must be done. Fields must be tended. Families expect you to continue, to function, to contribute, and so you do. You move through your days with a quiet discipline, carrying on as if everything is normal. But it isn't. There is always a part of you that is elsewhere, stretched across distance, tied to someone you cannot see, cannot hear, cannot confirm still exists in the same way you remember them. At first, you resist this feeling. You tell yourself it is temporary, that holding on is the right thing to do, that loyalty matters, and it does. In a world where promises are fragile, keeping one becomes a kind of identity. But time changes things. Seasons pass. Faces around you shift. People marry, have children, move forward. Life does not pause to match your waiting. It continues, steadily, without asking whether you are ready to follow. And slowly, you begin to feel left behind. Not abandoned, but suspended. You start to question what waiting really means. Is it loyalty? Or is it fear of letting go? If they return, will they find you unchanged? Or will they find someone who has learned to live without them? These questions have no answers. So you keep waiting. But it feels different now. Less like hope. More like habit. Standing at the edge of another quiet evening, watching the same road that has remained empty for so long, you realize something that is both subtle and deeply unsettling. Waiting is no longer something you are doing. It is something you have become. And in this world, where time offers no guarantees, that transformation might be the most permanent part of all. At some point, not everyone keeps waiting. You begin to notice it slowly. At first, it feels almost unthinkable. The idea of moving on seems like a betrayal, not just of the person you love, but of the promise itself. You told them you would wait. They told you they would return. That agreement, even spoken quietly, carries weight. But time has its own authority. Months become years. The silence does not break, and life, stubbornly, refuses to stay still. You see others around you making choices, marrying, building families, continuing forward as if the past has loosened its grip. And you begin to understand something difficult. Waiting is a choice, not an obligation. Families especially do not always support endless loyalty. They worry, they push, they remind you that uncertainty is dangerous, that a life built on someone who may never return is not a life at all. They speak of practicality, of survival. And in the medieval world, those words carry more weight than emotion. You watch as someone who once stood beside you, waiting just as faithfully, begins to change. Their conversations shift. Their eyes no longer linger on the road. There is hesitation at first, then acceptance. And one day, quietly, they choose someone else. Not out of cruelty, not out of forgetfulness, but out of necessity. Because love, in this world, cannot exist in isolation forever. It must exist within life, and life demands certainty, presence, and stability. Things that distance cannot provide. You start to see how common this is. People do not always abandon love. They adapt to its absence. Marco Polo himself observed societies where remarriage and shifting relationships were not scandalous, but expected when circumstances changed. Absence creates space, and that space does not stay empty for long. Still, the choice is never easy. There is always a moment of hesitation, a quiet recognition that by moving forward, something is being left behind. Not just a person, but a version of yourself. The one who believed, who waited, who held on. Standing there, watching someone step into a new life while a promise fades quietly into the past, you realize something both human and uncomfortable. Love does not always end with a clear decision. Sometimes, it ends when someone finally stops waiting. And then, there are those who never stop. While others move on, adapt, rebuild, some remain exactly where they began, waiting. You notice them because they don't change in the same way. Time moves around them, but they seem anchored to a single moment. The day someone left, the last words spoken, the promise that still lingers in the air long after it should have faded. They continue to believe, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, with a kind of steady certainty that is almost impossible to challenge. You begin to understand that for some people, waiting is not a burden. It is a purpose. Their life reshapes itself around absence. They build routines, responsibilities, even identities that include the missing person. They speak of them in the present tense. They keep their belongings untouched. They leave space where no one else is allowed to step in. And over time, that space becomes sacred. Others may question them. Family members may urge them to move forward, to accept what is likely already true. Friends may stop asking altogether, unsure how to challenge a hope that refuses to break. But the one who waits does not waver. Because for them, letting go would not feel like freedom. It would feel like betrayal. You realize that in a world with so little certainty, belief itself becomes something powerful. If there is no proof of death, then there is still the possibility of return. And as long as that possibility exists, however small, it is enough to hold on to. Marco Polo, in his travels, encountered people who lived with this kind of endurance, individuals whose lives were shaped not by what they had, but by what they refused to abandon. Their loyalty was not always rewarded. In many cases, it led only to a lifetime of waiting. But still, they chose it. You begin to see how this kind of devotion is both admired and quietly feared. Admired, because it reflects unwavering commitment. Feared, because it shows how deeply a person can be tied to something that may no longer exist. Standing there, watching someone gaze down the same empty road they have watched for years, you feel the weight of it. This is not hope in its early, fragile form. This is something stronger, something that has survived doubt, time, and silence. And in this world, where so much is uncertain, there is one thing that becomes painfully clear. Some people don't lose love. They carry it for the rest of their lives. Distance does not just test love, it changes it. At first, you believe loyalty will be enough, that no matter how long the separation lasts, what you felt before will remain untouched, fixed, preserved somewhere beyond time. But the longer the distance stretches, the more complicated that belief becomes. You begin to notice small shifts. Loneliness at first is manageable. It feels almost noble, proof of your devotion. But over time it becomes something heavier, quieter, harder to ignore. It settles into daily life, not as a dramatic pain, but as an absence that never quite leaves. And absence creates space. Space for doubt. Space for longing. Space for something else to enter. You meet people. You speak with them. At first, it is nothing. Just conversation, shared work, familiar routines. But slowly, almost without noticing, those interactions begin to carry weight. A look lasts a little longer. A silence feels less empty. A presence begins to replace the one that is no longer there. You tell yourself it means nothing, that it cannot mean anything, because you are still bound to someone else, someone far away, someone who may still be thinking of you in the same way. But you don't know, and that uncertainty changes everything. In the medieval world, there is no constant reassurance. No way to confirm that loyalty is mutual. You are expected to remain faithful, but you are also left alone to carry that expectation without support, without proof, without even knowing if the other person is doing the same. You begin to understand how fragile fidelity really is, not because people are weak, but because distance erodes clarity. Marco Polo, travelling across continents, would have seen countless examples of this. Relationships strained not by intention, but by separation. The longer two people remain apart, the more their lives begin to diverge. Different experiences, different pressures, different versions of who they are becoming. And eventually, those differences matter. Some betray quietly, not through grand decisions, but through small moments that slowly accumulate until the line has already been crossed. Others resist, holding on to a promise even as it becomes more difficult to justify. Standing there, caught between memory and presence, you begin to feel the tension yourself. Because in this world, love is not only threatened by time, it is threatened by proximity. And sometimes, the hardest thing to resist is not forgetting someone far away. It is feeling something for someone who is right beside you. And then, sometimes, they return. After years of absence, after silence that stretched so long it almost became permanent, a figure appears on the road. Older. Changed. Real in a way you had almost forgotten was possible. At first it feels like relief. The waiting was not pointless. The promise somehow held. Everything you endured, the doubt, the loneliness, the quiet discipline of holding on, suddenly seems justified. They came back, but as they step closer, something begins to feel unfamiliar. You recognize them, of course. The outline of who they were is still there. The way they move, the sound of their voice, echoes of the person you once knew. But time has done its work. It always does. They are not the same, and neither are you. Years apart do not just pause a relationship, they reshape it. Each of you has lived a separate life, shaped by different experiences, different pressures, different versions of survival. The person you waited for exists, but only partially. The rest has changed. You begin to notice it in small ways. Conversations feel slightly off. Silences linger longer than they should. The easy familiarity you remember does not return as quickly as you expected. It is there, somewhere, but it must be rebuilt, or accepted as something different. Marco Polo, returning to Venice after decades away, experienced something similar. He came back rich in stories and knowledge, yet even his own city felt unfamiliar. Time had created distance not just in miles, but in identity, and that same distance now exists between you. You start to realize that reunion is not the end of waiting. It is the beginning of understanding. Do you still love each other as you are now? Or do you love the memory of who you once were together? These questions are not spoken out loud, but they sit quietly beneath every interaction. Some couples find their way back. They adapt, rebuild, and create something new from what remains. Others struggle, because sometimes the hardest truth is not that someone failed to return. It is that when they finally do, they are no longer the person you were waiting for. And in the end, the road always wins, not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, over time. You begin to understand that in the medieval world, distance is not just an obstacle, it is a force. It reshapes relationships, erodes certainty, and tests every promise made in the safety of presence. The road stretches between people like a living thing, unpredictable, unforgiving, and always capable of taking more than it gives. You've seen what it does. You've seen lovers separated for years, holding on to memory as if it were something solid. You've seen letters arrive too late, or not at all. You've heard rumours that blur truth into something unrecognisable. You've watched people wait, and others move on. And you've seen reunions that feel less like endings, and more like beginnings of something uncertain. Through all of it, one pattern remains. Love is not enough to overcome distance. Not always. Because love, in this world, depends on presence. On shared moments, shared time, shared reality. Without those things, it becomes something fragile, something that must survive on imagination, belief, and endurance alone. And those things do not last forever. The road, on the other hand, is constant. It does not promise anything. It does not care about loyalty or memory. It simply stretches on, carrying people away from each other, scattering lives across distances that cannot easily be bridged. Marco Polo spent years travelling those roads, moving from one end of the known world to the other. And while he recorded wonders, empires, and customs, there is something quieter beneath it all, a truth that reveals itself only when you look closely. Every journey leaves something behind. Every departure creates a story that may never be completed. Standing there, watching yet another figure disappear into the distance, you feel the weight of that reality. The road is not just taking them somewhere else, it is taking them away from you. And maybe that is what defines love in this world. Not the moments when people are together, but the long, uncertain stretches when they are not. Because in the medieval world, love does not exist despite the road. It exists against it. You approach a structure that does not feel human, not at first glance. Massive stones rise from the earth, curved and fitted together with a precision that feels almost unnatural. There is no mortar, no visible binding, just weight, balance, and intention. The kind of construction that makes you pause and question how it was even possible. Locals call it the Tomb of the Giants, and standing before it, you begin to understand why. These megalithic burial chambers, scattered across the island of Sardinia, were built by the mysterious Nuragic civilization thousands of years ago. A culture that left behind towers, stones, and monuments, but very few written explanations. What remains is physical and deeply unsettling. You step closer to the entrance. A towering central stone, known as the Stele, dominates the front. It rises above you, carved and shaped with deliberate care, as if marking something important, or guarding it. The opening beneath it is low, too low. You instinctively bend as you approach, almost as if the structure is forcing you into a gesture of submission. It doesn't feel accidental. It feels intentional, as if whoever built this wanted every visitor to lower themselves before entering. And then you notice the shape. A wide, curved forecourt stretches outward in front of the tomb, forming what looks almost like horns or arms. It's not just an entrance, it's a space, a place where people once gathered, stood, perhaps even performed rituals before the dead. Because this is not a simple grave. It is a communal tomb. Inside, a long, narrow chamber extends into the earth, built to hold the remains of many individuals over time. Generations, possibly. Families, or even entire communities. You realize quickly, this was not built for a single person. It was built for memory, for continuity, for something that lasts beyond one life. And yet, despite its purpose, something about it feels larger than human scale. The size of the stones, the effort required to move them, the silence that surrounds the site, it all feeds the same thought. Maybe that's why people believe giants were buried here. Because when you stand before it, you don't just see a tomb. You feel like you're standing at the edge of something ancient and far beyond your understanding. As you step past the entrance, the scale of the structure changes. Outside, it felt monumental. Inside, it feels intimate. The long chamber stretches ahead of you, narrow and enclosed, built from carefully stacked stones that lean slightly inward, forming a kind of elongated corridor. The ceiling is low. The air feels heavier, quieter, as if sound itself doesn't want to travel here. You begin to understand something important. This was not built for a single burial. It was built for many. The tombs of the giants, created by the Nuragic civilization of Sardinia, were communal graves. Over time, the remains of multiple individuals were placed within the same chamber, layer upon layer, generation after generation. This is not a monument to one life. It is a monument to continuity. You imagine the process. A burial takes place. The chamber is opened. The remains are placed carefully inside. And then, over time, another burial follows. And another. The space fills slowly, not in a single moment, but across years, perhaps decades, even centuries. Death here is not isolated. It is shared. You start to notice how the structure supports this idea. The long, narrow shape allows for accumulation. The chamber is not designed for display but for preservation. The dead are not separated into individual graves. They exist together, part of something collective, almost like a final community. And that changes the way you think about it, because in many modern cultures, death is individual, personal, marked by names, dates, identities. But here, identity seems to dissolve into something broader. The focus is not on who you were alone, but on where you belong, even in death. Marco Polo never saw these tombs, and they predate him by thousands of years. But the world he travelled still carried echoes of communal identity. And here, in this chamber, you see one of its oldest expressions. You begin to feel the weight of it. Not fear, something else. A quiet recognition that these people did not see death as separation, but as continuation. Not the end of belonging, but a different form of it. Standing there, surrounded by stone and silence, you realize something subtle but profound. This tomb was not built to remember individuals. It was built to remember a people. And in doing so, it turned death into something shared, rather than faced alone. Before anyone entered the tomb, they gathered outside. You step back into the open space and begin to see it differently now. The curved forecourt is no longer just a shape. It feels intentional, designed. A place where something happened before the dead were laid to rest. The stones form a wide, embracing arc in front of the entrance, almost like arms reaching outward. It creates a boundary, not a barrier, but a transition. You are no longer fully in the world of the living, but not yet inside the realm of the dead. You are in between, and that space matters. The Nuragic civilization of Sardinia did not leave written records explaining their rituals, but the architecture itself tells a story. People did not simply arrive, place a body inside, and leave. They stopped here. They gathered. They did something. You imagine the scene. A group stands within the curved stones. The body lies nearby, prepared, wrapped, or arranged according to customs we can only guess. There may have been offerings, food, objects, perhaps items of personal significance. There may have been words spoken, chants, or moments of silence, or something even simpler, presence. Because rituals are not always elaborate. Sometimes they are about acknowledging the moment, marking the passage, creating a pause between what was and what is about to happen. You begin to notice how the space directs attention toward the entrance. Everything curves inward, guiding the eye and the body toward that low opening beneath the central stele. It feels almost ceremonial, as if the architecture itself is leading the ritual forward, step by step, from gathering to approach to descent. The tomb does not just receive the dead, it prepares the living. That realization lingers with you, because whatever took place here was not just about honoring those who had died. It was about helping those who remained understand what death meant, giving it structure, giving it shape, making it something that could be faced. Standing within the stone arc, you feel the quiet purpose of the space. It is not empty. It holds something invisible, the weight of countless moments repeated over generations, not loud, not dramatic, but consistent. And you begin to understand that before the dead entered the earth, the living needed a place to stand, a place to pause, a place to let go. Long after the builders were gone, the stories remained. You stand before the massive stones again, and it becomes easier to understand how imagination took over where memory failed. The Nuragic civilization left no written explanations behind in Sardinia. No names carved into the stone. No clear purpose described. Only structures. Silent, enormous, and unexplained. And when people no longer know who built something, they begin to invent answers. That's where the giants come in. The size of the tombs is the first clue. The stones are huge, some weighing several tons, fitted together with a level of skill that feels beyond what people expect from such an ancient time. To later generations, this didn't look like human work. It looked impossible. So they gave the builders a new identity. Giants. Not just builders, but inhabitants. The tombs were said to house enormous beings, creatures of strength and mystery who once walked the land. The long burial chambers suddenly made sense. Of course, they were large. They had to be. They were made for giants. You can almost hear how these stories would have been told. Around fires, passed down through generations, each retelling adding something new, a detail, a warning, a sense of awe. Because legends don't just explain, they protect. A tomb believed to hold giants becomes something you don't disturb, something you approach with caution, something that keeps its secrets, not because they are hidden, but because no one dares to uncover them. You begin to realize that these stories served a purpose. They preserved the site. Even without understanding its true function, people respected it, feared it, perhaps, but left it intact. And in doing so, they unknowingly protected a piece of history that might have otherwise been lost. Marco Polo often recorded similar legends during his travels, stories where the unknown was explained through exaggeration, myth, or imagination. And here, you see the same pattern. When knowledge disappears, story takes its place. Standing there, looking at the massive stones, you feel the pull of both explanations. The rational and the mythical. The reality of human construction. And the lingering possibility that something larger once stood here. Because sometimes, when a place feels too big to understand, it becomes easier to believe it was never meant for people at all. At some point, the question becomes unavoidable. How did they build this? You stand in front of the massive stones again, but this time you look differently. Not as a visitor, not as someone imagining rituals or legends, but as someone trying to understand the physical reality of it all. Each stone is enormous, not carved delicately, not polished smooth, but shaped just enough to fit, then placed with precision. Some weigh several tons, and yet they are arranged in a way that feels deliberate, balanced, almost architectural. This was not random. This was engineered. The Nuragic civilization of Sardinia had no cranes, no metal machines, no advanced tools in the way you might expect. And yet, they managed to move, lift, and position these stones with a level of coordination that still raises questions today. You begin to imagine the process. A stone is selected, likely from a nearby quarry. It is cut or shaped using stone tools, slowly, patiently, with effort measured not in hours, but in days or weeks. Then comes the real challenge, moving it. Without wheels, without engines, the only available force is human. Groups of people pulling together, using ropes, wooden rollers, and sheer coordination. The ground must be prepared, the path cleared, every movement controlled. One mistake could mean disaster. And yet, they succeeded. Again and again. You realize this was not the work of a few individuals. It was a collective effort. Entire communities must have been involved, not just in the construction, but in the planning. Someone had to understand balance, weight, placement. Someone had to decide how the stones would fit together, how the chamber would hold, how the structure would last. Because this was not meant to collapse. It was meant to endure. And that changes how you see it. This tomb is not just a burial site. It is proof of organization, knowledge, and shared purpose. A society capable of mobilizing people, resources, and time towards something that would outlast them all. You step back, looking at the structure as a whole. It no longer feels mysterious in the same way. Not because it is fully understood, but because you begin to see the human effort behind it. And somehow, that makes it even more impressive. Because this was not built by giants. It was built by people who worked together to move something that should not have moved at all. The more you look at the entrance, the more deliberate it feels. That low opening beneath the central stone is not just practical, it is symbolic. You find yourself hesitating before stepping inside again, not because of fear, but because something about the design suggests that crossing this threshold is meant to feel different, intentional, almost ceremonial. You have to lower yourself to enter. You cannot walk in upright, confident, unchanged. The structure forces you to bend, to adjust your posture, to physically acknowledge that you are leaving one space and entering another. And that changes everything. The Nuragic civilization of Sardinia may not have left written explanations, but their architecture speaks clearly. This entrance is not just a doorway, it is a transition. You begin to see it as a boundary between worlds. The world of the living outside, open and expansive, and the world of the dead inside, enclosed and still. The act of entering is not casual. It is controlled, guided, almost ritualized by the structure itself. Step by step, lower your head, cross the threshold, and once you are inside, everything changes. The light fades, the air cools, the space narrows, sound becomes softer, absorbed by the stone. It feels less like a place you visit, and more like a place you enter with purpose. You realize that whoever designed this understood something deeply human. Transitions matter. Moving from life to death is not just a moment, it is a process. And the living need to feel that process, to experience it physically, not just understand it intellectually. This doorway creates that experience. It slows you down. It makes you aware. It forces you to acknowledge that you are crossing into something different. And perhaps something sacred. You start to imagine how this would have felt during a burial. The group gathers outside. Rituals take place. And then, one by one, they approach the entrance. Each person lowering themselves, stepping into the chamber, participating in the final act of placing the dead within the earth. Not rushed, not careless, but deliberate. Standing there, half in shadow, half in light, you feel the quiet weight of the design. This is not just a tomb, it is a passage, not necessarily for the dead, but for the living, as they come to terms with what death means. And in that moment, you understand something subtle. The most important journey here is not the one taken by those inside. It is the one taken by those who step in and then return. You've seen the structure. You've imagined the rituals. But one question still lingers. What was actually buried here? As archaeologists began to study the tombs of the giants across Sardinia, they uncovered fragments, bones, objects, traces of human presence that confirm what the structure already suggested. These were not empty monuments. They held the dead. Multiple individuals, placed over time inside the long chamber built by the Nuragic civilization. Not carefully separated into individual graves, but layered together, sometimes mixed, sometimes reduced to fragments. You begin to understand something important. This was not about preserving identity in the way you might expect. There are no elaborate coffins, no carved names, no clear markers of who was who. Over time, bodies decomposed, shifted, and became part of a collective mass. The individual faded. What remained was presence. You imagine the process again. A body is brought in, placed within the chamber. But the space is not empty. Others are already there. Bones from previous burials remain, perhaps moved aside, perhaps simply left as they are. The new dead joins the old, not as a separate entity, but as part of something ongoing. This challenges how you think about burial, because here, death does not isolate, it merges. Archaeological finds also reveal small objects, simple offerings, fragments of pottery, beads, tools. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to display wealth or status. The items feel modest, almost equal, which suggests something else. These tombs were not reserved for kings. They were used by communities. You begin to see how consistent that idea is. Everything about the structure, its size, its shared space, its lack of individual markers, points toward a collective understanding of death, one where belonging mattered more than distinction, even in the end. And yet, so much remains uncertain. We don't know exactly how the bodies were prepared. We don't fully understand the rituals that accompanied them. We can only piece together fragments, building a picture that is always incomplete. Standing there, thinking about what once filled this chamber, you feel a strange combination of clarity and mystery, because we know enough to understand the purpose, but not enough to fully grasp the meaning. And maybe that's the most haunting part. The dead are still here, in a way, but the people who placed them there are almost entirely gone. Thousands of years have passed, and yet they are still here. You step back from the tomb and look at it as a whole again, not as a burial site, not as a mystery, but as something that has endured. Wind, rain, time, neglect, none of it has erased these structures from Sardinia. They remain, and that raises another question. Why? The stones are not held together by mortar. There is no modern reinforcement, no hidden structure keeping them upright. And yet they stand with a stability that feels almost defiant. You begin to understand that this was never accidental. The builders of the Nuragic civilization knew exactly what they were doing. The stones are carefully chosen, positioned, and balanced. Each one supports the others. The weight is distributed in a way that makes collapse unlikely, even over long periods of time. It is simple, but it is precise. You notice how the tomb is slightly embedded into the earth, protected rather than exposed. The long chamber is not built upward, but inward, shielded from the elements, from erosion, from sudden damage. The forecourt stones are large enough to resist movement, yet shaped to maintain their position. Everything about it is designed to last. Not forever, but longer than a human life, longer than memory. And that changes how you see it. Because this structure was not built for the moment it was used. It was built for the future, for generations who would return again and again to use the same space, to continue the same practice, to remain connected to those who came before them. This was not temporary architecture. It was intentional permanence. And in a world where so much is fragile, where lives are short, records are rare, and history can disappear easily, building something that lasts becomes an act of defiance. A way of saying, we were here. You begin to feel the weight of that idea. Because even though we do not know their names, their language, or their exact beliefs, we can still see what they left behind. Standing there, facing the same stones that have stood for millennia, you realize something quietly powerful. The people are gone. The rituals are forgotten. But the structure remains. And sometimes, that is enough to keep a civilization from disappearing completely. And after everything, the mystery remains. You've walked the length of the chamber. You've stood in the forecourt. You've imagined the rituals, the burials, the lives that once surrounded this place. You've seen the stones, touched their surface, tried to understand how and why they were placed here. And still, something is missing, because the truth is we don't fully understand these tombs. The structures built by the Nuragic civilization in Sardinia have been studied for decades. Archaeologists have uncovered bones, artifacts, patterns. They have measured, compared, analysed. And yet, key questions remain unanswered. What exactly did these tombs mean to the people who built them? Were they purely burial sites? Or something more? You begin to think back to the forecourt, that wide, curved space that feels almost like a gathering place. Some believe it was used for rituals, ceremonies, perhaps even offerings to ancestors or deities. But there is no definitive proof, only interpretation. Then there is the question of belief. Did the builders see death as a transition to another world? Did they believe the dead remained present in some form? Were these tombs meant to house spirits, or simply to honour those who had lived? We don't know. Even the orientation of some tombs raises questions. Certain structures appear aligned with the sun, suggesting a possible connection to cycles of light, time, or renewal. But again, the evidence is suggestive, not conclusive. You begin to realize how much of our understanding is built on fragments. We reconstruct meaning from what survives, but so much has been lost. Language, stories, rituals, all of it has disappeared, leaving only stone behind. And stone, no matter how enduring, cannot explain everything. It can only hint. Standing there, looking at the tomb one last time, you feel the weight of that uncertainty. Not frustration. Something else. Respect. Because there is something powerful about a place that refuses to be fully explained. A reminder that not every part of the past can be neatly understood, categorized, or translated into modern terms. Some things remain just beyond reach, and maybe that's part of their purpose. The Tomb of the Giants does not just tell a story. It holds one, partially revealed, partially hidden, and perhaps meant to stay that way.